So we're going to be going through how to make the leather wallet #1 design. Here I'm cutting out the pieces. So this piece is going to be the back. That's the 4x6" piece. We're going to set this to the side and start cutting our next pieces soon. So this piece is 2 3/4 inches wide. The next cut is going to be at 4 inches to make our vertical piece. So that's 4 by 2 3/4. This piece isn't going to get much done to it. Our next piece will get sewn onto the front of it. Here I'm just showing on the template where the pieces are coming from. There's a template available that looks pretty similar to that. So this is going to be our third piece. It's the square 2 3/4 by 2 3/4 piece. So here we are just cutting out the rest of the pieces. There is one back piece and then the other pieces get 2 each. So there will be 2 2 3/4 by 4s and 2 square 2 3/4 pieces. So I'm just using some scrap here. I like to use metal rulers because if you use a plastic one, your razor blade will dig into it. Always keep good pressure on the leather too, you don't want it to slip. These cutting mats are really nice too, make it much quicker to cut out pieces. So we're going to start the trickiest part of the wallet. We're cutting out the hole for your front card slot. We're coming out 1/4 inch down from the top. Obviously it doesn't matter which side you pick, but I like to show the designs of the leather, the natural marks, so I like to save them to the inside. Obviously this piece doesn't have anything like that. The next mark is going to be 1/2 inch down, so the 1/4 inch is going to be the top of the pocket and the 1/2 inch will be the bottom of the pocket. I'm just using a scratch awl to draw these lines, and then I'll freehand cut with the X-Acto blade. It makes it a lot easier. This line is going to come in 7/16 of an inch. I found that when you get to 1/2 inch, it becomes too steep of an angle and the card doesn't want to go in. So 7/16 to 1/4 from the edge will make a nice hole. Here I'm just drawing the diagonal lines to make sure they stay straight. Make sure you have a nice fresh blade for this cut. It's tricky to get the corners. You want to make sure that you're cutting only where you want to cut because it's easy to slip. What you see here is me taking the blade all the way through the line to cut out the corners. This is where you have to be careful because if you have a dull knife and you rip too hard, it'll slip past the pocket. I suggest taking a lighter and burning the strays away. So we have all our pieces cut out, we have both pockets cut out, and now we're getting to the easier part. What I'm doing is lining up the edge of my square piece to where it's going to sit on the rectangular piece, and just using a scratch awl to make a better contact for the glue. You want to do it on the sides and the bottom, and obviously not the top because that's where the card's going to go. This is just leather glue. You're going to put a thin layer on both sides and make sure you let it get dry and tacky. It makes a better, quicker connection when you do it like that. You don't want it too wet because it can slip around and not be lined up. This is just a putty knife. It's easier to spread around and make a cleaner line than your finger. I've seen other people use makeup brushes and all sorts of things. You can even use your scratch awl if you want. I'm just going back through and using the excess glue I have to make sure I have a good coating. In a minute here, you'll see me kind of scrape the excess off. You can tell it's starting to get tacky, and I want it to dry a little bit quicker. Now, when you line up your corners, the better of a job you do here makes for an easier trimming job later on. So take your time and make sure you get a good press down because you don't want that glue coming back up during your punching. So here I'm using an edge guide to mark where my stitching is going to go. That's 3/16 of an inch for 0.3 millimeter spacing on my stitching chisels. I also use 0.5 millimeter spacing stitching chisels, and for that I'll go a little bit farther in. You want to make sure that you mark the bottoms too and work on your corners because you don't want to draw lines past where the lines meet, otherwise you'll see it at the end. You'll also notice that I'm stitching all the way up, and I just think that that makes a cleaner finished piece when the stitching makes a perfect rectangle all the way around, which you'll see later on. You'll also notice that I'm only stitching one side. You want to make sure that you're stitching the correct sides, because when you put it on the wallet, they have to be in the middle. If you put them both on the right side, the left pocket will work, but you'll notice the right one won't. Of course, make sure to keep your stitching chisel straight, vertically, and hit hard the first blow. Make sure you're going straight all the way through because you don't want curvy lines in the back. It doesn't matter as much right now, but it will matter when you attach this piece to your main back piece. So now we're going to be starting the stitching process. I used 0.6 millimeter round waxed thread. Of course, it's nylon. You want to make sure it's nylon so that it can melt. Measure out 17 inches of your thread. That's the perfect amount for this at 0.3 millimeter stitching spacing. If you've never saddle stitched before, here I'm going to take the thread through the eyelet of the needle, and then I'm going to turn the needle around and actually push the needle through the thread. I'm going to do that twice to make sure it locks in good. Then we just pull the long end and take the little end back behind the needle so that the knot is behind the eyelet. It's going to make it go through the hole a little bit better. If you struggle getting your needle through the hole, don't be scared to take your awl to widen out the hole a little bit. Here I'm doing the other side. You're going to need 2 needles to saddle stitch. There's different ways you can do it, but the way I do it is I pick the first hole and I go all the way through. I'm going to find the middle of the thread by pulling both needles, as you see here. Then I'm going to take the thread that's sticking out of the finished side of the leather and put it into the second hole. You see right there I'm pinching the other side to make sure it doesn't slip through. There I'm sticking it in the second hole, pulling it all the way through. And then you notice I keep it always on the bottom. So the one that went through the second hole stays on the bottom, and the one that went through the first hole goes on top. I stick that through the second hole and pull it all the way through. You want to pull it tight and snug. Don't pull it too hard and pinch out your leather. And you want to make sure your pulling is consistent across all the knots, or else you will notice. Now I'm going through the third hole, pulling it all the way through. I'm taking that to the bottom, taking my last piece and putting it back through that hole over the top. Then you just repeat that process. So we have our piece all stitched up. What I'm going to do is pull the thread tight, cut it real close to the wallet. I'm going to take a lighter and melt the ends. This just locks it in so you don't have a big knot. Then I press the metal part of the lighter in to make sure it's flat. Okay, so we're finishing the edge now. What I did was got a little bit of water on my finger and made sure I got the whole edge damp. This is 120 grit sandpaper. I think it works the best for starting. I'm trying to keep it flat so that I don't push leather around the edges. It's an important part, but we're going to go back with a beveler and fix that later on. So I'm going to get it damp one more time, and I believe this is 180 or 200 grit sandpaper. Of course, you can use whatever you like or whatever you have. So this is an edge beveler. If you don't have one of these, you can carefully cut it away with your X-Acto blade. You'll notice there's a bit of a lip on the side of the wallet. You just want to get rid of that for the burnishing process. Because this piece is still rather thin, I'm only cutting the finished side of the leather, and the back side's going to sit flat on the wallet. So even if you do round it out, it's going to end up flat after being in your pocket. This is gum trag. I'm rubbing a thin layer over the edges and just kind of working it with my finger first. You'll see I use a piece of pipe. They have bevelers. You can even use your tool handle. I'm just going to press decently hard and try to round out the edge. You see I got some on the finished leather. That'll go away. You want to make sure that you round this part out, and it's going to make it kind of glossy. You'll know when you're done when it starts feeling kind of tacky. This is a canvas bag. It kind of just rounds out the edge and dries it up a little bit. Here I'm taking beeswax. This is optional, but it makes it nice because it shines up the edge a little bit more and it keeps it waterproof. Now I'm going to burnish this too. This step is more about speed. You want to get that friction to kind of heat up the wax and it'll melt into the edge. And there you go. It's a smooth, shiny edge. So now we're going back to the gluing process. Similar to when we scratched the finished side to glue, we're going to make a mark with a pen just past the pocket to make sure that you can't see it when it's all done. That's just a mark for me to know how far in I should glue, because you want to make sure that you're gluing both sides. You'll notice I like to put a little bit more glue than I need on the first piece. That's because when I go to spread it out with my putty knife, I can take the excess and put it on the other piece. Here I'm just making sure that all the edges got a good coating, and I'm going to kind of press it out so it gets tackier quicker. I'm going to let that side dry a little bit more while I work on this so that it can make a quicker bond when I attach it. Okay, so we can clean off our putty knife and start putting our pieces on. You want to make sure again that your finished edge goes to the inside of the wallet. Prioritize lining up the bottom of the wallet because you have 3 pieces to cut away. It's much easier to trim on the top. If it isn't perfect, you can often stretch the piece over to the edge and make it kind of not square, but so the edges line up, and you'll never notice once it's stitched. So now we have our first look at what the wallet's kind of going to look like when it's all done. Here we're making the marks again for our outer piece using the same spacing and the same stitching chisels. Don't forget to go through the top and bottom hole of the line you just stitched, or else it won't go all the way to the edge. Start at your bottom corners and work up, and when you get close to an edge, try to make sure that your spacing stays the same. With this size stitching chisel, it usually works out for me. So we're using 42 inches of thread here. It works best so that you have a little bit of slack at the end. Of course, if you use different stitching patterns, it might come out a little bit different, but 42 is a safe number. Okay, so our stitching's all done, and you'll notice I rounded the corners. I use my rounded end of the ruler to do that. You can find anything round to make a mark. I even use the bobbin of my thread sometimes. Here what I did was I wrapped the sandpaper around the pipe. It makes it a little bit easier to keep a flat edge when you get to the thicker pieces of leather. Making sure to keep it wet, it keeps the dust down primarily. It also kind of helps get rid of the burrs. So we're using the same finishing procedure as we used before. The water with sandpaper, the gum trag or toconol, and the beeswax. Then once it's all beveled, it's all done. Feel free to wax all the finished surfaces too to make sure it stays watertight. And you can optionally dye the edges to have a darker look.